Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May edition of the Staff Wellness and Health Booster Sessions. Our topic this month is, what is my tendency? My name is Chad Saxon, Communications Specialist with Shared Health, and I'll be your moderator for the session. Our presenter today is Carmel Watson, Organizational Assistant Specialist with Blue Cross Manitoba. We'll get to Carmel in a few seconds, but I'll just go over a few items prior to that. So as we all know, this has been a time of great change in our world. We've been forced to adjust how we conduct ourselves in the workplace, our homes, and with our social connections. These changes can sometimes feel overwhelming. To support the mental health and wellness of health system workers and the public, Mental Health and Addictions Shared Health has brought together skilled trainers from across the province to facilitate several booster sessions. Today's session on What is My Tendency looks at the 4 tendencies. The 4 tendencies describe 4 different personality types based on response to expectations, both internal, the expectations you have for yourself, and external, the expectations other people have for you. This fun session is based on the book The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Discovering which tendency best describes you can help you better understand and interact with others, discover your personal strengths and weaknesses, and change the dynamics at home and work. So following Carmel's presentation, it looks like we'll have a few minutes for questions. So if you do have a question come up as we're going along, please enter it into the question section, and that'll give you an opportunity to get that to Carmel, and I'll present them afterwards. Also, I'll just make a note that the session is being recorded and will be made available as a streaming video on demand on Shared Health's mental health resources page, and then also on the health providers page, and I'll add a link into the chat here in a bit for that so you can find it easy. So with that, I'll turn things over to Carmel and she'll go into her presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Chad. Yeah, hello, and thank you for joining me for the session on responding to expectations. As was already shared, this is a fun session, and I'm really excited to share it with you. As already mentioned as well, I work for Manitoba Blue Cross, and we are very proud to be your provider for employee assistance benefits. So what that means is that through your EAP benefits, you have short-term counseling available to you and your family members. We also have several other services, one of which is workshops and seminars. And so I've done a few of these booster sessions already, and I thought I'd finish off my time with this fun one. So I hope you enjoy the session today. It's, like I said, a little bit more light and fun. Please bear with me if the technology doesn't work. We've been testing it out, and as you probably heard me say before, it's not always my strength, this technology piece. So here's a quick snapshot. It shows behind me and in front of me, so I can be a little bit distracted with that, but here's a snapshot of how we're going to spend this next half an hour together. So I'm going to get you to ask yourself how you respond to expectations. So yes, we're talking about both outer expectations and inner expectations. This is going to help us to discover which of the 4 tendencies that are outlined in this framework that we fit into. I'll spend a good amount of time talking about these 4 tendencies. There's a lot of information today. Just as important as using this information to better know ourselves, it also allows us to be better able to understand other people. In fact, we can live and work more effectively with others when we identify their tendencies. So whether that's your coworkers, your managers, leaders, teachers, coaches, partners, maybe even your kids. So understanding the 4 tendencies gives us a richer understanding of the world. And so my hope is that this in itself will allow us to be more compassionate towards ourselves and towards others. So yeah, lots of information for you today. Sorry, again, need to see if it's connecting to the next things. Okay, so again, we're talking about expectations. So outer expectations, these are the expectations that others place on us, like meeting a work deadline. And then we have inner expectations. So these are the expectations we place on ourselves, like keeping a New Year's resolution. So those are the difference between those 2. Just not clicking forward for me. Okay. So in the book, The 4 Tendencies, Gretchen Rubin suggests that depending on a person's response to outer and inner expectation, that person falls into one of 4 distinct types. Now, before I get into these 4 types, I really do want to mention that I am not an expert in the 4 tendencies, and I'm not presenting this as a trainer, okay? There are people out there who are trainers on this. So this is more of an interesting and fun way that we can all learn about ourselves and possibly find ways to understand each other. There's lots of other personality profiles out there. There's the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, or the DISC assessment, if you've heard of any of those. And so this is just another one of those that allows us to better understand ourselves and other people. It's suggested in the book that our tendencies are hardwired, that they're not the result of birth order, parenting style, religious upbringings, or gender. They're not tied to extroversion or introversion. They don't change depending on whether we're at home, at work, or with friends. And they don't change as we age. So we bring these tendencies into the world with us. Now, before I get into them, I also want to say this because I find a lot of people will do this in personality testing type of thing, is they think there's one that's better than the other. And so I really want to say there is no best or worst tendency, okay? The happiest, healthiest, most productive people aren't those from a particular tendency, but rather they're people who have figured out how to harness the strengths of their tendency, counteract the weaknesses, and build the lives that work for them, and interact with others by identifying other people's tendencies, right? So with wisdom, experience, and knowledge from, something like this, the 4 tendencies, we can use our time more productively, we can make better decisions, suffer less stress, get healthier, and engage more effectively with other people, especially if we know how we respond and how they respond. So it's really, again, just a fun way to have a better understanding of ourselves and other people, and then hopefully a little bit of compassion towards ourselves and to others when we know that. Come on, slides. I don't know why this takes so long. Okay, so let's look at the 4 tendencies that Gretchen Rubin outlines in her book. Let's get this up here. So we have the first one here is upholders. So they respond readily to both outer expectations and inner expectations. Questioners question all expectations. So they meet an expectation only if they believe it's justified. So in effect, they respond only to inner expectations. Obligers respond readily to outer expectations, but struggle to meet inner expectations. And rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. So already just sort of hearing that, maybe you already kind of know where you fit, maybe not. I do have a short video that I'm going to share with you on the next slide, which again, bear with me, I have to share and come out and then come back in. So we're going to see how this is going to work. But I really like the video because it gives that better understanding of the 4 different tendencies. So let's see here. I am going to try and do this, see if this is going to work for us. Okay, I'm going to try and see if I can get back to my PowerPoint here. Bear with me again. There's a few steps, I believe. Chad, could you let me know, is that working properly?
You are back.
Okay, wow, that worked smoother than in my practice. And the video worked okay.
Yes, it did on my end.
Okay, great. Oh, let me get past this. Okay, so I like that video because it does give that snapshot of the 4 different tendencies. And again, maybe you've already figured out what tendency fits you the most. But we're going to take a closer look at each tendency. So starting with the upholders. So they meet the work deadlines and they keep the New Year's resolutions without much fuss. For the most part, they want to do what others expect of them, and their expectations for themselves are just as high or just as important. Because of their readiness to meet outer and inner expectations, upholders also love schedules and routines. So again, you might recognize that in yourself. More than the other 3 tendencies, upholders find it fairly easy to decide to act and then follow through. They also easily form habits. Upholders are self-directed. They have a little trouble hitting deadlines, keeping appointments, meeting commitments, or managing tasks, and they don't depend on supervisors, reminders, or penalties to stay on track. So they really are able to stay on top of things without much reminders or difficulties. They rarely suffer from resentment or burnout, and they don't depend on others to motivate or supervise them. And so just as a side note, upholders usually don't mind wearing uniforms, following a precise recipe, or obeying instructions. Because of their affinity for meeting expectations, upholders may feel compelled to observe rules even when it's more sensible to ignore them. So these are just a few key points here on upholders. I think I have a few more points on upholders. So sometimes they become impatient or even disdainful when people reject expectations, can't impose expectations on themselves, or question expectations. So they can be a little, judgy on others that can't do that same thing as easily as they do. So yeah, they can become disapproving and uneasy when others misbehave, even in minor ways. They might find it difficult to delegate because they doubt others' ability to follow through. So it's almost like, well, I'll just do it myself, right? They feel uneasy about change to routines, habits, or schedules. And so for sure during the pandemic, right, this was difficult for people who would identify as upholders, right? The adjustments that were made of, whether it was working from home or changes in the workplace, would have been a real struggle for people who identify as upholders. Upholders' commitment to meeting expectations can sometimes make them seem cold or judgy, like I said, because there's a relentless quality to upholders. They're going to do what must be done, even if it means inconveniencing other people or being out of step. Now, the last one on here that I'd like to share is sort of these stats, which is that upholders represent approximately 19% of the population. So we'll, as we go through these, keep these in mind, the different percentages. So about 19% of the population would identify as upholders. So next, I want to talk to you about questioners. So questioners show a deep commitment to information, logic, and efficiency. So they want to gather their own facts, decide for themselves, and act with good reason. They object to anything they consider arbitrary, ill-reasoned, ill-informed, or ineffective. So questioners meet an expectation only if they endorse it as effective and reasonable. So once questioners accept the reason for an expectation, then they're self-directed. They don't need much supervision. Questioners tend to question everything. So because questioners require solid justification for what they do, they can add tremendous value to relationships and organizations by ensuring that they and also the people around them don't unthinkingly accept expectations that aren't well justified. So in fact, questioners they're often puzzled by other people's willingness to just act without sound reason. Like that doesn't make sense to them, right? They need to understand it and get their questions answered before they would act. Questioners want to make well-considered decisions that are and they're often willing to do exhaustive research, like you saw in that video, right? So they love to weigh out their options. Just as upholders, like we spoke to first, upholders love index cards. The love of spreadsheets is very common amongst questioners. So they also love to send people lots of articles. Again, you might know people in your life who do this. They love to send articles, do their research, get lots of information. Let's see, what else do we know about questioners? And so because of their enthusiastic research, questioners often become resources for other people, and they enjoy sharing their knowledge. So kind of like, oh, you know who would know about that? Ask so-and-so, right? We all probably have somebody that we refer to when we need information. Along those same lines, questioners tend to be very interested in improving processes. So they like to eliminate mistakes and make things run better. When questioners don't accept the justification for an expectation, they refuse to meet it, which can get them into trouble. Okay, we can see that, right? At home or at work. You know, others might find their constant questioning to be tiresome, draining, or obstructive. Others might conclude that questioners raise questions needlessly or argue for the sake of arguing or refuse to accept authority or decision. So that's kind of that other side of being a questioner. So the constant questioning means that questioners sometimes suffer from that, what it said in the video, the analysis paralysis. So they want to continue to gather research, weigh their options, and consider more possibilities. They kind of crave perfect information, but very often in life, we have to make decisions and move forward without perfect information. So in this one, let's see, what would we say? Questioners represent approximately 24% of the population. So yeah, I'll get you all to just sort of think right now. Do you recognize people like this in this category? These ones are a little bit easier to identify, the questioners. For me, I feel like this one is pretty obvious. When I was reading the book, I had to laugh because my partner is a questioner and he fits very, very clearly into this category. And at times, his constant questioning can be exhausting. And when it comes to making decisions, he's going to have to research it for weeks and before making a decision. It's difficult to make a decision. And he also loves spreadsheets, right? We have a spreadsheet for everything. So I found that really quite hilarious as I was reading about questioners. And so again, maybe you know somebody in your life who fits into that category. So moving along, we're going to talk about the next tendency. So this is the obliger. So when an expectation comes from the outside, from a boss, a client, a family member, a doctor, a coach, an accountability group even, obligers are going to respond. So for the most part, they meet deadlines, they keep their promises, they follow through for others. However, obligers struggle to follow through for themselves. So for obligers, it's the inner expectations that pose a challenge. So the obliger is the rock of the world at work, at home, in life. They're the ones who people count on the most. People who are obligers tend to be the most likely ones to contribute. They excel at meeting other people's demands and deadlines. And so because of their active sense of obligation to others, they make really great leaders, team members, friends, and family members. Now, interesting, of all of the tendencies, the obligers are the largest tendency for both men and women. It's also appropriate that the term obliger begins with letter O, because just as the blood type O, the universal blood type, the O tendency is the universal partner. So they get along most easily with the other three tendencies. Now, on the downside, no matter how much obligers want to meet their inner expectations, if they don't have some sort of outer accountability, that means that expectation isn't going to be met. So again, maybe some of you are connecting with this one. Many obligers struggle to say no, even when they're feeling very burdened by expectations. To overcome this reluctance, obligers can remind themselves that saying no to one person allows them to say yes to someone else. I think I shared that in another presentation around setting boundaries. So even though the obliger requires no help to meet external expectations, in order to meet internal expectations, they need to create their own sort of structure of that outer accountability. So it might include supervision, deadlines, an auto-generated email, an app that highlights sort of a unfinished task on a to-do list, or an accountability or group. And obligers are more likely than the other tendencies to say they wish they belong to a different tendency. Isn't that interesting, right? So they're the most easy to get along with, but they are often the ones that say, I wish I was a different tendency. And the reason for that is with the other three tendency, much of the frustration they create falls on others, not themselves. So with obligers, it's the obliger themselves who bear the burden of the downside of their tendency. So they're often, upset by the fact that they can't meet others' expectations, or that they can meet others' expectations, but not their own, the expectations for themselves. So they kind of beat themselves up, whereas the downsides of the other tendencies sort of irritates other people, whereas the obligers can kind of turn it on themselves. So as already stated, let me share this. The obliger is the largest group with 41% of the population falling into this category. So seeing as this is the largest group, I would be curious if we were to do a survey of the people who are here today, if we would find this, that we got similar percentages. I also laughed at this one because I love and know that having outer accountability is what motivates me. So I really connected with this one. And so, I'm in a book club because I know I got to read the book by the time we meet, right? And that outer expectation is what motivates me to finish the book. Even though I like reading, I'm more likely to kind of let myself down on that. But if they're depending that I read the book, I'm going to do it. So anyways, I laughed when I read that one. So lastly, we're going to quickly take a look at the rebels. So rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner. They want to do what they want to do in their own way and in their own time. And if someone asks or tells them to do something, they resist. So they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. They resist expectations imposed from within as vigorously as those imposed from without. So rebels want to act from a sense of choice, freedom, and self-expression. The ability to choose is so important to rebels that sometimes they make a choice even when it's against their own self-interest or it's not what they prefer, just to reassure themselves that they can make that choice. So rebels aren't persuaded by arguments such as, people are counting on you, or you've already paid for it, or you said you'd do it. Or even that it's against the rules or it's tradition. Like, that's not going to work for a rebel, okay? Now, of the four tendencies, rebels has the fewest members. They take great pleasure in defying people's expectations. So when they're doing what they want, rebels often drive themselves hard, especially if there's an element of that idea of I'll show you, right? So think of situations where someone became successful and they said something like, they said I'd never become a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, you can put anything in there. And this becomes the driving force to prove them wrong. So at times, the rebel tendency is enormously valuable to society. Many, we think of that term, right? Rebels with a cause. So they use their rebel spirit to support the principles and purposes that they believe in. And as you can imagine, this absolutely can be good or bad depending on the cause. Most of the big movements that have happened in the world that have made huge shifts and are so important were because of rebels. They place a very high value on authenticity and self-determination, and they want their lives to be a true expression of their values. Others, especially obligers, can find it very freeing to be with rebels because they're so in touch with what they want and they have no trouble refusing obligations. So often they do better when there are no expectations at all. If a rebel is asked or told to do something, the rebel is very likely to resist. And this instinct can create problems for spouses, healthcare professionals, parents, teachers, managers, or leaders. So the harder the push, the greater the rebel pushes back. So rebels resist just about anything they perceive to be an attempt at control. They resist doing repetitive, boring tasks, such as sort of even like as simple as taking out the garbage or filing expense reports, unless the consequences are serious enough. They've also learned that when they simply refuse to do something, other people often pick up the slack. which is probably the other tendencies, right, that are going to jump in. They often refuse to accept and be limited by a label, even one that might be accurate for them. So some rebels move or change jobs frequently to resist being trapped in a certain identity. So when you're dealing with rebels, it's crucial to accept that rebelhood is a deep part of their nature. It's not a stage, okay? It's not something that they're going to outgrow. And rebels respond best to a sequence of, again, it's shared in the video, information, consequences, and choice. So we want to give rebels the information they need to make an informed decision, alert them to the consequences of actions that they might take, and then allow them to choose with no lecturing, hovering, or hectoring. So here is our stats on this. Rebels Tennessee has the fewest members at 17% of the population. Now, I have a lot of slides left, and I see that we only have 2 minutes left. So what I would like to do is just quickly show these slides, but I can send them out to Chad and they can be sent out so you can take a look at them closely. Here you'll see there is absolutely a quiz if you wanted to go and actually see, this is what I think I am or what category I would fit into. So you can go and do the quiz and actually see if you fit in there. And the following slides are a little bit about how you can use this information at work. But please know, in her book, if you decided to read the book, she's got so much information about how to use this information at work, in your personal life, how to work within your tendency in lots of different areas. She even has an app actually that you could download to help you harness your strengths and also acknowledge your weaknesses depending on your tendency. So yeah, I'm not going to go over all this because we are running out of time, but I will share this for sure, all the different slides. And lastly, I just wanted to share this last one. Even though we can most definitely learn from each other, once we know our tendency, reflecting on the 4 tendency makes it clear more so why we're not getting along with someone else, which is also valuable information, right? We can get to know ourselves, but it might be like, hey, I really struggle to interact with somebody who now I recognize as a rebel, and we can, or a questioner. That's the one thing I always thought is like, okay, they're asking a lot of questions, and that might take up time in a meeting, but there's a reason for that, right? That's their natural tendency. So when we understand the 4 tendencies, we can set up situations to work better for everyone. I'm going to leave it at that because we are right here at 12:30. So I'll put it back to you, Chad, to see if there are any sort of pressing questions or comments.
Great. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, but if anyone does have a question, please enter that into the question section in here, and we'll try and get through a couple just in the next little bit here. We did have one question pop up. Is it common that people have a little bit of all tendencies?
Great. And so I had that as those other slides that I didn't get to. So in her book, she will say most people fall within one. However, in her book, she talks about people who might be a little bit of a combination of 2 or maybe a sprinkling. So she has like lots of information. If you were, say, you got high scores on these 2, what that would look like. And even information on if you're this and your partner is this, or your kids are this, there would be different sections to learn a little bit more about that. So she feels like most people fall into one category, but absolutely there's going to be some people that fit into a few.
Great. So as Carmel mentioned, we'll be able to share the slides, and I think probably the easiest thing to do is we'll post them to that health providers page on the Shared Health website. I did post the link to that page in the chat. So if you're not already familiar with it, if you want to take that down, please just maybe make a bookmark of that. And when we post the video, we'll post the slides along with that. We're seeing lots of other comments pop in, just lots of people noting how much they enjoyed the presentation and asking for slides. So as I mentioned, yeah, we'll post them to that page. But,
awesome. Yeah, feel free to grab the book. The book is a short book if you're interested in learning more. Like I said, you can do the audio book or the physical book, and then she also has an app. So if you like stuff like this, it can be really interesting and a nice quick read.
Terrific. So I think, yeah, we'll close things out there, and I'll just say again, thank you to Carmel for today's presentation, and of course through all the presentations throughout the spring. I think this is the fourth or fifth one, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've done a great job. It's been awesome. Lots of great topics covered throughout the entire spring, and been great to work with you on these.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, and just quick before we close out, I'll also make note that we do have our next presentation on June 14th, and that one is, I did enter that into the chat as well. So if you're wanting to register for that, the title is Team Activities That Foster Wellness, and Sheila Betker, who is with the WRHA, will be the presenter for that. So again, you can see that link in the chat section, and you can go ahead and register if you'd like, and we'll also be doing our usual promotion through all the regular channels. So again, with that, yeah, just again say thank you to everybody, and thank you to Carmel, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.